Night falls, a time when all seek peace and the warmth of family. But sometimes, the night brings horrors, things we never wish to face. Have you ever felt the fear of the darkness? That chilling, empty sensation, as if someone were watching you from the shadows, as if something were lurking, waiting? In the summer of 1985, in Los Angeles, the fear of the night became real, a terror that the city could never forget. A phantom appeared, sowing fear throughout the city, an obsession from which even dreams could not offer escape. They called him by a name both terrifying and mysterious, the Night Stalker. To understand the demon called Richard Ramirez, we must turn back time to his childhood in El Paso, Texas. Try to feel it, the suffocating darkness, the violence, and the indifference that young Richard faced every day. Can you imagine? A boy growing up in a hell on earth, where love was a luxury and violence an everyday occurrence? That boy wasn't allowed to live like other children. He endured the lash of the whip and the harsh words and the cold indifference of those who should have protected and loved him most. Those scars were not just on his skin, but they were etched into the young soul of Richard. His childhood was stolen and replaced with fear, loneliness, and a pain beyond description. In the darkness of that home, how did Richard truly feel? What did that boy have to endure? In the haunting silence and the endless nights, he asked himself, why me? What did I do wrong? Can anyone save me from this place? Those questions went unanswered, and they echoed within his soul until the darkness completely consumed him. And then, to escape that brutal reality, Richard sought out his cousin, Miguel. But was Miguel truly a savior? Or was he the one who pushed Richard into an even deeper abyss, into a path with no return? Miguel was not just a cousin. He was a man who planted the seeds of terror into the soul of Richard. He showed him horrifying images of war, the torture, and the death, things a child should never know. Can you imagine what Richard had to endure? Those pictures were not just images, but they were daggers that cut through his soul, shattering his innocence and every last shred of hope that he had left. And then, the darkest moment arrived. Miguel killed his wife in front of Richard's very eyes. That moment, like a thunderbolt, tore through his soul, shattering everything and leaving a scar that could never be erased. How did Richard feel in that moment? Perhaps, in those terrifying seconds, he understood that the world was a cruel place, and that demons lurk in the shadows, always waiting. The light in his eyes was gone, replaced by a chilling emptiness and an unending darkness. Was that moment the true birth of the monster within Richard? Or was it simply a prelude to the terrible things that would follow, the horrifying actions that he would commit in the days to come? As the scars of the past became an obsession, Richard began to seek things that could help him forget the reality he was forced to face. Drugs, dark religions, and his twisted desires became his escape. But was that truly salvation? Or just a hopeless escape? In the darkness of drugs, in the delusions of dark religions, and in the depths of his depraved desires, Richard was searching for solace. But instead of peace, he found only destruction, and a demon was slowly taking hold of his mind and his body. Can you feel his fall? He sought empathy in those dark rituals. He found satisfaction in his sinful desires. And then, the demon within him was no longer sleeping, but was finally awake, and it was controlling both the soul and the body of Richard. And, in those moments, was Richard still human? Or had he been completely swallowed by the darkness? And was there any hope for him? Any redemption left? Perhaps it was in those sinful acts that Richard lost himself forever. And from that point on, the most terrible things were about to begin. And then, as that demon finally took full control of Richard, the Night Stalker stepped from the shadows, spreading terror throughout California, changing lives forever. Over 14 months, he murdered 13 innocent souls, all different, all with a future, and all taken by the hand of death. The victims, men and women, from 22 to 80 years of age, their stories all came to a tragic end by the hand of a brutal monster. You have to imagine the nights when he struck. Everything was shrouded in darkness and fear. Every home, every street, became a stage for his most terrible acts, and where innocent souls had to face unspeakable suffering, and a death that was both painful and cruel. Can you feel their suffering? Those victims, how did they feel? In those last moments of their lives, who did they call for? Family? Friends? Or were their prayers just swallowed by the darkness and the silence? And what were their stories? And were their stories ever heard? And did anyone even care about their pain? On June 28, 1984, Jenny Vinkow, a 79-year-old woman, was brutally murdered in her own home. Then, on March 17, 1985, Dale Akasaki became the next victim, and Richard Ramirez took the life of Tsai Yu in an act of senseless violence. And then, 10 days later, Vincent Zazera and his wife, Maxine Zazera, faced their tragic end, and countless others would be forever changed by the acts of this one man. And you have to ask yourself, how could one man cause such devastation? The deaths continued. The crimes became more horrific and more frequent. From Los Angeles to San Francisco, people lived in terror, wondering if they would be next, all because of the shadow of the Night Stalker, a figure that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere. But the horror that the Night Stalker spread could not extinguish the courage of the people of California. Their fear turned into anger, into a determination to fight against the darkness. And they were no longer alone in the darkness. They began buying guns, securing their doors, protecting themselves and their families, and they decided that they would not give up their fight. The police increased their patrols. The FBI formed a task force, all to track down the killer, and clues began to emerge. From the darkness, a witness provided a license plate. Others shared key information. A fingerprint was found in a stolen car, and a sketch from a survivor was released. And then, finally, the name of Richard Ramirez came to the attention of the authorities, and the hunt for the Night Stalker finally began. And then, one day in August, as Richard Ramirez, unknowingly, stepped into a convenience store in Los Angeles, he had no idea that the authorities were closing in, and the walls were starting to collapse around him. He was exposed, and the world knew his name and his face. And after a dramatic chase, Richard Ramirez was finally captured, a moment of triumph that the entire city of Los Angeles had been waiting for. But did it truly bring them peace? Or would the darkness still linger, like a ghost, forever? Richard Ramirez was sentenced to death for the heinous crimes he had committed. But that death was not the end of his story, and it was not the end of the darkness. He continued to live for many more years in the shadows of prison, and unbelievably, he even found love with a woman who admired him, a truly ironic and twisted ending to a dark and painful story. And so, Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, finally passed away in 2013, but the terror he inflicted remains a haunting reminder of the brutality that exists within the heart of man. And even in death, he had not found peace, and perhaps even he could not escape the darkness that he had come to love. The horror of the Night Stalker ended with his death, but the scars that he left on the city of Los Angeles and on the lives of so many remains forever, and serves as a chilling reminder that evil can be found where we least expect it, and that sometimes the monsters we fear may not be the ones hiding in the shadows, but they may be the ones that are walking among us, and even in our hearts. And that is the story of the Night Stalker, a story of brutality, of fear, of the darkness in the human soul, a reminder that sometimes we can be the monsters that we fear, and that there are things in this world that we can never understand and never hope to escape. Can we ever truly find the light in the vast emptiness of darkness? Or will darkness forever be a part of our world? And can we ever truly escape our past and those shadows that are always lurking just beyond our sight? And will the darkness always win? I have tried to provide a translation that is both accurate and also captures the tone and the emotion of the original, and I have kept to the order and style of your chosen narration. I hope that it is useful to you. Please let me know if there is anything else you need.